What's good, my dear language learning master? And welcome to episode number 24 of the Language Input podcast, in which, as you know, I'm gonna talk and I'm gonna answer the most common questions and misconceptions when it comes to the language learning process. Yeah. And well, I mean, in general, any topic related to the language learning process, any topic in which I help you forget about the traditional grammar approach that's hurt so many people in my eyes. All right, and so any topic to help you forget about that and realize that we can learn any language while enjoying the process every step of the way. Yeah, I'm totally convinced. And with that being said, and before getting into today's episode, I wanted to remind you, as usual, to leave your comments down below on today's specific topic or any other topic, or, any question you may have when it comes to the language learning process. Feel free to let me know, because I'll be more than happy to help you out, and you'll be giving me ideas for future episodes, as I'm always saying. All right. And with that being said, thank you in advance, and let's get into today's topic. And today, I'm not gonna talk about any misconception like in other episodes, but I'm actually gonna talk about what I think is a killer combination when it comes to language learning. And I'm going to explain what I mean in a moment, okay? But first of all, I've already talked about many times. I've already talked many times about the fact that, input needs to be comprehensible, and the fact that we learn a language subconsciously, all right? And I've talked about, the fact that we don't have to consciously focus on specific words, sentences, and so on, but rather on the message, because the message is the most important thing. And so we learn a language by understanding what we're listening to or reading. So understanding the message is the most important thing, all right? So I'm assuming we already know that. So I'm assuming what I'm going to talk about already fulfills that criteria, all right? So I'm just going to take it a step further. Let's put it that way, all right? And what I mean by killer combination is like a combination of two factors that really, to me, really made up the most interesting and powerful resources to help us learn a language, learn a foreign language, right? And I'm going to talk about adults because that's what I have the most experience on, but, I'm pretty sure this works for kids as well. So, yeah. And what I mean by the killer combination is the following. So let me explain. You've probably realized that when we're trying to get started with a language, when we're starting learning a language from scratch, whether that's resources like cartoons or we're going to language classes, in general, most resources are really super simple, because super simple in general, right? Because that's what we need in order to understand the message, which is the most important thing, right? And that's totally fine, that works. But what I mean by killer combination in this episode is the following. Whether that's cartoons, not cartoons, but for example, when we're talking about beginner resources, all right, we have either cartoons or language classes in which the language is super simple, but also the ideas we're talking about, right? Whatever the language, usually conversations are around, John lives in a house, John likes dogs, John plays the guitar every day, stuff like that. You understand what I'm saying, right? And obviously that's a good idea from the language point of view, because there are simple sentences and that's what people need in order to learn a language, right? But when that killer combination that I was talking about comes into place right now, and to me the perfect combination in order to learn a new language is any type of resource or language class. So this works for teachers. I mean, this is useful for teachers as well. Any type of resource in which the language is simple or simple enough for students to understand the message, depending on the different levels, of course, but challenging and interesting on an intellectual level, so it's fun and challenging again, and and it helps us think about the actual message, about what's going on in the story, about a possible solution to a mystery, etc., as opposed to paying attention to form or to specific words or conjugations and so on. All right, and I'm gonna give you more examples in a moment, okay? But for example, getting back to most resources that are available out there for beginners, if you look at them, like I said, cartoons or language classes usually have like those super easy conversations that talk about intellectually easy concepts as well. All right, I hope I'm making myself understood, because I'm trying to explain it the best possible way. But like I said, John lives in a house. John goes to New Zealand. I don't know. John likes basketball and stuff like that, which is okay from the language point of view, like I said. But in my eyes, it kind of fails to provide interesting input in the long run, especially, right? Because when we're started from scratch, pretty much any type of input that we can understand is like, mind blowing for us, right? And then we also have like cartoons, or not cartoons, but like fairy tales for kids and so on, that actually most of the times how to put it into words, most of the times the language they use is actually quite complex for a beginner resource. Like, they use that sort of literary language, like of fantasy, or like in a like once upon a time in a far, far away kingdom, and they lived happily ever after, an expression like that, which are actually quite complex from the language point of view, right? And then they talk about simple ideas or simple concepts from an intellectual point of view. All right, I hope it makes sense. And to me, we should actually flip that, and then the other way around is the way, to me. And the other way around is, like I said, so imagine you're in a language class environment and you're the teacher or the students, from any point of view. Like you're creating a story about a mystery, for example, okay, and you're creating it with the students, and you all participate in the creation of the mystery, and the main character needs to choose between 3 different options if he wants to keep going, if he wants to, if he wants to stay alive, or whatever the plot is, right? And in that sense, you can actually use a pretty simple language, or simple enough for students to understand what you're saying. Like, the main character has 3 options, the left road, the center road, and the right road. That's super simple. And it's just like a quick little example, but you get the point, right? Like, you can actually use a pretty simple language for them to understand, but at the same time, intellectually, they have to be thinking about the different options the character has. Whether what's going to happen if he takes the first option, what's going to happen if she takes the second option, about the different possibilities on an intellectual point of view. And that, to me, is the killer combination. And it works for language classes, for resources, and so on, because it makes it way more interesting in my eyes. And like I said, subconsciously, it helps you focus on understanding what's going on thinking about the different possibilities the character has, and so on. So you're focusing on the message, which is the most important thing, again. and you kind of forget. First of all, you kind of forget that you're listening to a different language because you're so immersed in the story that you kind of forget about that, and you totally not care about the specific words, specific endings, or grammar structures, and so on, because you're interested in getting to know what's going to happen next, or on thinking about different ideas to suggest, so you keep the story going, etc. All right, does it make sense? I hope so. Yeah. And I'll give you more examples in a moment, but that also relates to me to another concept or another situation in which, I see a lot of adults trying to learn a second language. All right. In my case, a lot of people from my country, from Spain, for instance, who want to learn English, or people from different countries who want to learn Spanish, or whatever the language, that they're beginners in a language, and they try to use series and movies in order to improve their language knowledge, right? But the problem is, they want to use series and movies because they're super interesting. Again, they meet that second criteria that I talked about, right? They're super interesting. They want to know what's going to happen to the main characters. They're thinking about the different possibilities the characters have. What's going to happen next, etc. But they're not at that level to be able to understand what they're saying, because the language they use is a language for native speakers or advanced students, right? And that's why a lot of people keep watching series and cartoons in a foreign language for a long time and feel no improvement whatsoever, because actually getting back to the chapter I talked about, getting back to the chapter in which I talked about subtitles, many people use subtitles in their native language, which to me is useless, but that's another topic, like I said. But the thing is, when we're getting started with a language, as adults, many times we feel like really easy resources are okay when it comes to helping us understand the language, but they're not interesting enough, or they're really super simple, right? You know what I mean? Like cartoons, like I'm saying, or even language classes in which the conversations or what's going on is really super simple and it's not engaging or interesting in the long run, right? And on the other side, we have a lot of, and right now with so many online resources available, we have tons and tons of different resources to enjoy in the language we're trying to learn, but they're more complex than what we can understand, right? So we don't, and we get frustrated as well, right? So in this episode, I wanted to talk about that killer combination, and this works when you're learning a language, but this is also a message for language teachers, like I said. So whether you're a language teacher or you're a student and trying to learn a new language, and I'll give you examples at the end, but if you can find ideas, resources, etc., in which the language is simple enough for you to understand what's going on, and intellectually complex enough for you to find it interesting, appealing, even compelling, right? That to me is the killer combination, because you keep learning the language because you understand what's going on, and in the long run you're gonna stay motivated because you're having fun, because most likely that's something you would enjoy in your own native language, right? And in that regard, I was talking about stories in which you create mysteries or you try to solve them right now, or I don't know, or I'm thinking about like the concept of escape room, for example. If you can play online, like in escape room games, or you can actually use them as a language teacher. That's it works for both. In escape room sort of scenario or idea, for instance, you can actually use pretty simple language to help your students understand, or for you as a student to understand. Like you have to go to room number 3 and find a key. That's simple language. You can actually help them a lot with a pretty simple language, even for beginners, right? But at the same time, intellectually they have to be thinking about how to put the clues together in order to help that person escape, or whatever the topic is in that escape room, right? Or more ideas. I've been that's what I'm always searching for, when I'm trying to think about ideas for my YouTube channel, for my classes, and so on. That's why I started a series on sort of hypothetical situations, like what would life look like if we could fly, for example. You can actually use a pretty simple language in order to explain your opinion, your idea, and in order to talk about hypothetical situations like that. You can say, I don't know, if we could fly, I don't know, I'd be able to travel pretty fast, or I'll travel to every country in the world. You know what I mean, right? But at the same time, you can actually, get deep when it comes to the different situations from an intellectual point of view that you can create, right? Does it make sense? or when I'm talking about, using games or board games, like I talked about in the previous episode, or even riddles in which the language itself is not part of the solution, but rather the concept that you have to think about. I hope it makes sense again, because it's kind of hard to explain. But so that's the general idea, to look for resources or ideas that you can explain with a very simple language if you're a teacher, but at the same time, they're complex enough for your students to really enjoy what they're listening to, or they're complex enough for your viewers to understand what you're talking about and have fun with complex ideas, trying to find solutions to problems, to riddles, to games. I don't know. Like the typical game in which one character always tells the truth and the other lies. You can actually talk about pretty simple stuff when it comes to the language, and at the same time create intellectually challenging stories or scenarios for that person to solve, or to create new details around. All right? Hope it makes sense. And other examples that I was just thinking about I was thinking about podcasts right now, for instance, and recently I've seen a lot of podcasts that try to teach the language, which is not a bad idea in itself, but again, many times they get back to consciously studying the language, right? So they're trying to help you learn the language, and they're focusing on specific words or sentences. Even if they don't want to teach you the grammar, they're still focusing on consciously learning the language. So there are episodes about how to use specific verbs or specific expressions. And that, to me, is still not optimal, because they're focusing on consciously teaching the language, right? Or consciously helping you learn the language. Whereas you can actually create a podcast, or whatever it is, or YouTube videos or YouTube series, whatever it is. You can actually create resources or content in which, again, you talk about intellectually complex ideas with a very simple language that people can understand, right? So again, you can talk. To give you a couple of examples, I've been listening to a podcast in French, which is called Breaking All News. The name is in English, but it's a French podcast, all right? And in that podcast, they talk about, like the name suggests, all news, or historical or even fictional news, and they talk about them, or they explain them from a perspective of like a breaking news TV show or radio station, whatever you want to call it, with like field reporters at the specific place, talking to the main characters or to the main people in the story. I listened to an episode in which they talk with Christopher Columbus, for instance, about his discovery in America and so on, right? Just to give you an example. So in that sense, they can actually present the news, or they can actually talk about that historical situation with a pretty simple language, but at the same time talk about or use humor to help students or listeners in this case keep working on their French. I'm just giving you an idea, but so to wrap things up here, because this has been a long one. This has been a long one, but I think it's really, really important, really interesting to know this, because that's super important when it comes to learning a language, and I think it's a key concept that we need to understand. That we don't learn a language by focusing on specific words, expressions, and so on, but rather we learn a language by listening or reading stories, games, whatever it is, because we're interested in the message behind them, in the concepts behind them, in the stories behind them, in the mysteries behind them, all right, in the historical situations behind them, and so on and so forth. And we're learning the language as a sort of side effect, right? So from a perspective of a language teacher, create content, create stories, create ideas in which you use simple language. So your students can understand what they're listening, and with and intellectually complex ideas behind it. So they're challenged. So they find it super interesting and fun. Okay, and from the perspective of a language student or of a person who's trying to learn a new language, try to find resources in that regard. Try to find topics you're interested in and listen to those podcasts or YouTube videos or whatever it is, according to your level, of course. But don't just try to consciously learn specific expressions or how to use them, but actually read or listen to content that you're interested in yourself, as the concept, as the idea behind it, as the message, and the process is going to work. All right. So I hope I made myself understood in this episode, because it's sort of a complex idea, but that to me is the killer combination. Like simple language, so people can understand what they're listening to, and intellectually complex ideas, so they're challenged, so it's interesting to them, so it's compelling to them. Okay, does it make sense? Hope it does, and of course let me know in the comment section below. Like I said, if you're listening to this on YouTube or any platform where you can leave your messages, because I'm interested to know your opinion. And yeah, that's it for today, everyone. And well, thank you for listening to the whole episode. Thank you for coming this far in this episode, and I'll see you in the next one, in which I'll talk about a new topic related to language learning. Okay, and yeah, that's it for today. Thank you, my dear language learning master, and wish you have a good day. I wish you a good day, whatever you might be, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.